Hey guys, and happy May the 4th folks, or actually not so happy May the 4th, because welcome to the review of another Star Wars Tales story, Tales of the Underworld. And I have to say, it was pretty underwhelming. It certainly was much better than Tales of the Empire, but it's not really a high bar to clear, but certainly nowhere near as good as Tales of the Jedi, but overall it made me actually realize something in general about those Tales stories. But first I have to say that Tales of the Underworld, ultimately, it wasn't offensively bad like vast majority of Disney's Star Wars projects, but it wasn't particularly good either. It was just if you watch it in isolation, then it just comes across as two generic stories happening in the Star Wars universe. And on the other hand, if you measure it to the old expanded universe, then literally a short comic book for just to read once and then move on, really. But first, I'll talk about the good. And first and foremost, the animation is spectacular, beautiful, gorgeous, and actually that's what I noticed about all the Star Wars animated projects, that it seems like animation is getting better and better, because the final season of the Clone Wars, everyone was saying that, oh, animation looks better than ever, which it did, but then the animation for the Bad Batch, as well as for Tales of the Jedi, was even better, and then even better for the season 3 of the Bad Batch and Tales of the Empire, even if the actual story of Tales of the Empire was trash. But now I say it probably is Star Wars animation at its best. But that's kind of natural. I mean, they're advancing on with the animation, so I guess the fact that the animation is better than ever, that's natural, that's to be expected. But the actual two stories, and one about Asajj Ventress and the other one about Cad Bane, I have to ultimately say they ended up being pretty generic. I say the Asajj Ventress story I actually liked more, and I'll say why. I mean, admittedly, the story of Asajj Ventress pretty much feels like an epilogue to the story that's pretty much complete, actually. But nonetheless, I actually found her relationship with this young Jedi boy that she made friends with kind of heartwarming, actually. And I did kind of their dynamic and all that, because the story is about Asajj Ventress' life during in the beginning days of the Empire, and then she makes friends with this Jedi boy, although it can see how from different worlds they are, because she still kind of has this mentality of the bounty hunter that she had in the latter half of the Clone Wars, while he very much is stuck in the Jedi ways. And although they form a strong friendship, you can see by their overall attitude and all that they still come from very different worlds, and I thought that was actually a pretty good dynamic. But all in all, ultimately, it really felt just an epilogue story that's pretty much complete anyway. Asajj Ventress' redemption really happened already in the Clone Wars and then the last season of the Bad Batch, really. It just feels like they're now basically extending the story that's pretty much complete. I mean, maybe telling a story of her far longer adventures post-redemption afterwards, that could be interesting, but the problem is they only have 3 short episodes to tell it, and as a result it comes across as I just said, as really an aftermath. But it also ties into a bigger problem that we'll get to soon enough, actually. But first we have to talk about the second story, the Cad Bane story. And the Cad Bane story arc, first and foremost, I gotta say this. I really love Cad Bane. In the Clone Wars, he was literally one of my favorite villains. And I always thought he was actually a much better bounty hunter than Boba Fett. I always was a fan of Boba Fett, but I actually thought that Cad Bane was an even better bounty hunter. So yes, in the Clone Wars, Cad Bane was always one of my favorite villains. But here, honestly, although before we get to it here, I'll also have to say that the Book of Boba Fett completely butchered him, though. That was one of the worst endings to a really good villain I ever seen. And I honestly feel that Filoni should have stuck with his original plan of just having him be killed by Boba Fett in a classic Western gunslinger duel in the Clone Wars. That would be a much better arc ending for Cad Bane, especially that's basically also makes sense for Boba Fett. It's basically a King of the Hill story, that Cad Bane is the best and most feared bounty hunter, but then it would be completely justified while Boba Fett takes over the mantle. Like, yeah, that should be the ending for Cad Bane. He shouldn't have lived actually during the events and past events of the original trilogy, but oh well, they could have at least done the best of what they did, but no, as I said, it was literally one of the worst endings to a really good villain I ever seen. Like, his death was so underwhelming, but that's besides the point. I'm now ranting about the book of Boba Fett, but still, I knew that the second story will be about Cad Bane, and I initially thought that we were gonna be getting like a Cad Bane on a mission or something, and I thought this will be interesting, but no, it's an origin story, basically a backstory of how Cad Bane came out to what he came to be, but I have to say, from the beginning I wasn't happy about that when I found out that's what they were gonna be doing, because not every villain needs a sympathetic backstory, or a backstory for that matter. Like, Cad Bane just worked as a ruthless and feared bounty hunter, and he was amazing as that. He's like, not every character needs a backstory and a explanation of why they are the way they are, and Cad Bane's a perfect example. So when I saw that this is an origin story, I thought, oh really, like, why does every character need an origin story? But as for the origin story itself, I have to say that it's pretty generic overall. Like, it's basically like how Cad Bane was pulled into the life of bounty hunter, and then that he and his best friend get separated, and the best friend ends up as a sheriff deputy while Cad Bane ends up as an outlaw and the bounty hunter, so they basically end up on very opposite sides of the law. And this is a kind of a classic Western style story, so I won't necessarily argue that this is a bad backstory for Cad Bane. If anything, it actually works, because as I said, Cad Bane basically embodies the Western gunslinger roots of Star Wars, and very much. So I guess giving him like a classical Western type story kind of makes sense in this case. But overall, the story ended up being so predictable and all that. And worst of all, and that goes to a far bigger problem, it needed a lot of more room to breathe and for the character development and all that, because it just feels like a bunch of cliff notes from different parts of Cad Bane's backstory. And that actually, in my opinion, goes very much deeper into those Tales stories in general. Like, those stories are very much need a much more room to breathe, because as I said, they are generally like three parter short episodes and different parts of the events happening, and that's one of the reasons why they end up being so underwhelming in the end, because as I said, those stories very much need a lot more room to breathe. I mean, not the Tales of the Empire. Like, Tales of the Empire, the whole stories were pretty bad to begin with, but with Tales of the Underworld, I think that if the backstory for Cad Bane was a lot more fleshed out with longer and maybe more episodes, then I think it could end up being a really interesting backstory, even though I still don't think Cad Bane actually ever needed a backstory to begin with, but oh well, glad they didn't at least make him too sympathetic, but it perfectly makes sense why he became the way he did without making him too sympathetic, because again, not every villain needs to be sympathetic, and Cad Bane, I feel, is one of them. Ultimately, I will say Tales of the Underworld falls somewhere in between decent and mediocre, somewhere in between there. Like, it's certainly much better than Tales of the Empire, and it's not offensively bad like most Disney Star Wars projects, but ultimately, after watching all the 3 episodes, I felt like kind of like...
Okay.
And again, very beautiful animation. As I said, I believe if those stories were longer and given a lot more room to develop and breathe, then I think those stories could actually be pretty interesting, engaging stories. The problem is that they just feel more like cliff notes than actual well-developed stories. But overall, Tales of the Underworld, I guess the best way you could say it is like somewhere between decent and mediocre and inoffensive, really, which is pretty much what we will likely be getting from Disney Star Wars anyway at this point, at best, of course. But also, don't get the wrong idea, like, Star Wars isn't getting saved, and it doesn't matter. Even if the story was great, like, Star Wars is long dead at this point, and nothing is gonna get better as long as the same people are in charge. And no, the departure of Kathleen Kennedy is not gonna change things anyway, because her replacement is not gonna be someone better, trust me. And the only Star Wars stories that I'm still interested in are Maul, Rise of his Criminal Empire, that might actually be interesting, and Season 3 of Star Wars Visions, but that's very much disconnected from the rest of Star Wars canon anyway. And as for Darth Maul, Rise of his Criminal Empire, well, the trailer did leak online like a month ago or something, and I did see it. It's long been taken down at this point, but it did seem interesting, and it seems like they're very much using the ideas of original plans of George Lucas for episode 7 to 9, which would be so much better than what Kathleen Kennedy and George R. Abrams came up anyway. Shame they didn't that's not actually what happened, but oh well, that's neither here nor there. But yes, it does seem like they are very much taking inspiration from those ideas, although I can't really reveal any details because again, the trailer hasn't technically been released to the public. I just seen it leaked and then it's been quickly taken down. But I am interested, but very cautious about Maul, Rise of an Empire. But again, don't get the wrong ideas. Star Wars isn't and will not be saved as long as the same people remain in charge, which sadly seems like they will for now. They aren't going anywhere, unfortunately. And thank you folks for checking out this video. Press the like button, please subscribe to this channel, and not so happy May the 4th because it's not really a good time to be a Star Wars fan anyway. But talk to you soon. Bye.